that morning, I'm a physician also in private practice, as well as working for the fire department. And I started in the fire department in 1980. I'm sorry, I started in the fire department in 1981. And so on that day, it was a Tuesday, and I was heading to my office, but I first went to the hospital to make rounds. So as I'm making rounds, on the little television and on my beeper, I got an announcement that a plane had hit one of the World Trade Center towers. And I remember thinking it was probably a small little plane that perhaps accidentally hit the tower. And then on the television, I could see the sort of explosion that you could see on there. And I said, I think I better respond to this, because I normally would respond to big events where there was a possibility of injury or loss of life for one of our firefighters. And I knew that this would be something that would put them at risk. What was interesting is I said to the patient, I have to go. And she looked on the television and she said, oh my goodness, one of my sons is a firefighter. And I said, I'm sure he'll be okay, but look out for him. And I headed out, and as I ran through the parking lot, I actually ran into my uncle, who is a physician. And he said, where are you going? And I said, I'm going to the World Trade Center. There's been a plane hitting it. So I drove into the city, and I'm a native New Yorker. So as I drove in, I thought, wow, I'm not hitting any traffic. I'm going right in here. And it was just a beautiful sunny day, and you could see smoke coming up from this tower. And I remember thinking, why would a plane hit the tower on a beautiful day? It wasn't foggy, there was something odd. So I went through, and the police, got me right through. And as I got out of the tower, I parked my car and again thought, wow, I've got a parking space. How lucky am I? And then I turned around and saw these molten cars and debris from the jets on the main West Side Highway. And I thought, this is something. A couple of firefighters came over, some officers, one being Hank Sarasoli, as I pulled out my bunker gear, because I have bunker gear in my trunk. And he said, you're gonna need a helmet, Doc. And I said, I don't have a helmet. And he said, we'll get you one. We'll go to the local firehouse, which is called 10 and 10, the engine and the truck, both 10 and 10. So as we walk our way over there, I ran into some of the EMS people who were standing near the South Tower. And they said, be very careful. There are jumpers coming down, and there's more debris coming down. And you could see that it was just not safe there. So I walked along one of the sort of side roads to the 10 and 10. And as we did so, on the ground were just, again, pieces of debris from the jets, but also body parts. I mean, you could actually identify, as though it were an anatomy lesson, here's different body parts on the ground. And it was just, you knew at that point, this was a day you would never forget, no matter what else happened. So then as we went into 10 and 10, there was a television on in the back, and it showed the Pentagon had gotten hit. And that's actually when I realized this is a terrorist attack. And I remember thinking, now we're at war. And I remember thinking, but who are we at war with? I absolutely could not fathom how we were suddenly at war when I did not feel that there was any inkling that something like this would occur. So we went into 10 and 10, I got a helmet. There were some civilians there who were stable, but sort of, sheltering in place there. And then we left, because my role usually is to go by the command center and find the people sort of leading it. And then they would say to me, all right, there's an injury, you've got to do this, you've got to help out in some way. So I was able, it was very hard to communicate, the phones weren't working. And I was able to speak to one of the deputy commissioners, Lynn Tierney, and she said, we're over by the command center. We are over by the North Tower. So I said, okay, I'll head over there. So again, we took a sort of a back road to get over because I was trying to avoid being too close to the South Tower because of all the debris and everything raining down. So as we came out to the West Highway there, West Side, a group of firefighters said, Doc, come over, someone's been injured. And I ran over, and there was a firefighter by the name of Danny Sir. And he was on his way into the South Tower when he was hit on the head and had sustained a very significant, which turned out to be life-threatening injury to his self. So we were able to get an ambulance. We got him on the ambulance. We attempted to resuscitate him. I knew things were not good. And I just said to some of the members, stay with him, take him to the hospital because he has to go to the hospital. And then the ambulance drove off. And as we're crossing the street, again, looking for the command center, Captain Hank Sarasoli said, the building's coming down. And I turned around and I could see the tower coming down. And I remember thinking, like, how are we going to survive this? We ran across the street and we sort of were in the side of one of the buildings there, like a little alcove. And as everything started to come down, it went from sunny day to pitch black and just debris was raining down. And as it happened, you know, it feels like in some ways it's like slow motion. And you say to yourself, I said, I'm still alive. You know, a second later, I'm still alive. And I remember that absolute feeling of, I can't believe I'm still alive. And then everything got quiet. And then you look out and it's as though we were in nighttime. It was just dark. Everything was very muffled sounding. And there were pieces of paper everywhere. It was as though everything else had been destroyed. There were no individual pieces of that building you could see other than the big frame. And even that you couldn't see well because it was so dark. But there were just pieces of paper floating everywhere. So we went out and I was in my dress and my sandals ready for work. So I went over to my car and I said, if I'm going to do work, I have to be, you know, dressed. So I put on my sneakers, put on my shorts and top, and then ran over and we started looking for people. And we found one of the first people I found on the street there was a firefighter named Kevin Shea. And I remember thinking, I've got to keep track of people's names. I've got to know who's been injured because they're going to need to know this information. And that name was easy to remember because I have a cousin by that name. And in the last Trade Center attack, the only firefighter who was significantly injured was a firefighter named Kevin Shea. And I thought, how ironic is this? Another Kevin Shea injured at the Trade Center in the fire department. And you could just see he was not doing well. So we got him over to what we thought was safety because he was in the middle of this road with all the debris. And we got him into a parking garage where he could be at least out of the fray, and then started looking for help to get him transported because at this point it was hard to even see where anything was. So as I moved forward there, I again was heading now to the north because the south had come down. And as I came around the corner looking for some equipment or some bandaging material, something, I heard them say, the tower's coming down, which was the North Tower at this point. So again, debris starts heading down the road and somebody grabs me and brings me in through a revolving door into a building. And you just feel the whoosh of everything go by from the North Tower. And, you know, again, you feel like, wow, here I am still alive. So I came out of that. A gentleman, a firefighter by the name of Mike Shepard was there. And he assisted and we were able to get hold of an ambulance with a stretcher, and they then picked up Kevin and we walked over toward the river. And again, now you're looking over the Hudson and I can see the Statue of Liberty, which is just bathed in sunlight as we're sitting in the dark. And I can remember thinking, oh my goodness, what's next? Is that going to be a target? What else will happen here today? Because it just seemed as though anything could happen in the moment. We got him on, there were boats coming up to take people away. So we got him on I think it was a police boat to take him to Jersey to be seen. And then I started walking toward the Battery. This was a little lighter there. And who do I run into? I run into Dr. Prezant, and I ran into Chief Nigro, Dan Nigro. So the three of us just happened to be at this one place right by the Battery, and no one could communicate, nothing was working. Chief Nigro said, I can't get hold of anyone. We couldn't get hold of anyone. So we basically went back up, I think we went up Broadway and walked upward back to do what we needed to do. Along the way, there was like a greengrocer, and we were just covered with debris. I couldn't even see. So we went and they had a hose for the, to do the vegetables and all, clean it. So I took the hose and just like cleaned off my face and head so I could see. And I remember thinking they're set up for business, like this is going to be an ordinary day. And this is clearly not an ordinary day. And there was a hardware store there that said you can use the phone. So I went in and I made a phone call and said, I think I talked to my mother, who was at the office, and said, I'm okay, I'm here, but I'm alive and I'm okay and I'm going to be here for a while. Tell everybody. And then I continued upward and we went to up by City Hall. So we set up a command center there, or I guess you'd say a triage center up by there. We were able, the Duane Reade was open, so we were able to take a few items from there. And then we set it up in the lobby right there. And people started bringing us supplies, EMS and other people brought supplies. And a few people came in to have their eyes washed out. But for the most part, we did not see a lot of injuries, which I think we started to realize meant that things were very bad. And then people would come in and filter in saying, we have Father Judge, he's dead. We have him at the church, and we just want you to know where he is. And I remember thinking, this is going to be an ME case because we need to have the information about everyone and know what's going on. And then some of the, cars would come by and say, they told me that that Commissioner Feehan had died, and they told me that Chief Gansey had died. So early on, we knew that several people who we were close to were no longer with us. And it was quite clear that so many people had succumbed. So we kept this center open all day. Halfway through the day, we had to move across the street to Pace University because there were more buildings coming down. I think building number 7 started to come down, so that it wasn't safe where we were. We had to move over. And again, we had this triage set up. People came to assist. Other medical officers came. Other doctors from the vicinity came. But we did not have any volume of patients, again, because so many people were either there helping or were deceased. What I was amazed at was, despite the lack of communication from a technical viewpoint, it was an all-out response of our department. So people poured in who were off duty, who were retired. The response was just incredible. The street by City Hall was filled with firefighters, clearly many of whom I recognized. And when you would see someone you knew, you'd be so happy because you'd say, he's alive. And it helped you feel that there were people who you knew and loved who were alive. And it was just heartwarming. And it felt, to me, I felt like it was like the Revolutionary War, because there was no real equipment. There was no communications. And the chief in charge would say to somebody, you go and tell so-and-so that we have 10 men to bring over. Go tell chief so-and-so. And that's how the communication went on. It was literally a runner or, you know, a personnel from fire running into an area to say, we can do this, we're here to help you, we can do what we want, you know, what you need, and tell us what you need. And it was literally that verbal back and forth communication that allowed them to continue that response in those first hours and even probably days, because the equipment just was not working at that point. And again, it was an all-out response. You know, we talk about the individual stories, but the story was also how this department, in its very, to me, finest moment, moved forward to assist and do everything possible to help the people before the towers collapsed and after, and did everything in their means. And it was just amazing to see that. So then we finished up in the evening, because at that point there was not a lot more to do. We went back to headquarters. I spent the night there. And first thing in the morning, we were trying to figure out a plan of first trying to identify who was missing, who had been there, because you have to remember this event happened right around 9 o'clock, and the fire department tour starts somewhere at 9 in the morning. But the fire department doesn't arrive at 9, they arrive at 8 or 8:30 in the morning. And then there's an exchange of information and discussion about what might have happened the night before, and everyone is prepared to go. So when that event started, there were literally, in most cases, 2 tours of people there. There was the evening and the morning. And so many of the companies had everybody get on the rig and respond. So you had companies that lost not just one tour of people, but you know, that so many people. I mean, every rescue company, the hazmat was having their medical done at headquarters, and they said, we've got to go. And they went, and I think to a person, they died. So just trying to figure out who was at that event, who was alive, who died. People took other people's bunker gear. So they didn't even know when bunker gear was missing who was there. So the next few days were really spent trying to figure out who was missing, fielding calls from family members who would say, you know, doctor, my husband was there getting, he was on medical leave. He must be there. Where is he? And people had left headquarters on a bus to go to this event. So therefore, you knew if he was missing, he was probably dead. It was just terrible. It was a really very difficult time. And you just had to keep going through it to do your part, that you could do. I mean, I was not there digging, I was not there putting fires out, but you did what you could to assist people. And sometimes just listen to their story and hear what was going on. Because so many of our members not only were there, their children were there, their brothers were there, their family was there, not to mention the firehouse is like a family. So these were huge losses for so many people. And there was still so much of the what ifs. You know, so many people in this department will make what they call a mutual. A mutual is where you work for me, I'll work for you. So for that person who made the mutual, there was this feeling of, I was the reason this person is no longer there. And getting over that for people was extremely difficult, because there was a feeling of, that should have been me. Why did I make that change? Why did that change occur? The notification was difficult because we didn't even know who was there. And it was hard to even have a setup of hierarchy that would normally do it. I mean, when we have 1 death or 2 deaths, you have a cadre of people there ready to assist. And in this case, many of the people at the highest levels were gone. the fire department really leads from the front. So you have, you have a deputy commissioner at this event, you have the chief of department, you have his assistant chief, you have so many people who you have now lost, in addition to all of the other members from across the city that have responded. So it really left a huge void in the department, which was quickly filled. I mean, people were able to move forward and bring bring people up and get running again. And I think it's a testimony to the department about how well they did do that. But in those first days and weeks, it was extremely difficult, and it's still felt by this department. It really is. It just was a prolonged mourning that has continued in some ways, because we're still seeing, the program we set up for the World Trade Center exposed members was really a recognition of the exposures of that day and the time spent sort of in the trenches at that World Trade Center. That was a terrible day, but a day that lasted because there was so much activity that was required to look for people who might be injured, and we had the hope that we would rescue people. But the exposures that people had were enormous, because that type of smoke and fumes and debris was really toxic. You had asbestos in the buildings, you had jet fuel, you had so many different chemicals that people were exposed to. And people will say, well, they had bunker gear. Well, the SCB mask that people wear, that lasts 15 minutes. So you can't say that people had that available to them. It took at least a week or two before you had appropriate masks for people, the P100. So the exposures that people had in those first few days and even weeks was enormous. And people spent months at a time down there. So we set up a program, a medical program, really in response to those exposures, and also to, I think, let our members know that no matter what happens, we're there to support them. We can't change the events of those days. We can't bring people back. We can't fix what happened, but we can at least acknowledge what they were exposed to, and we can help them both from a medical viewpoint and from a counseling viewpoint. And I think those were important messages to give to our membership. And I think they have become even more important as down the line, 19 years later, we are building a new wall in headquarters of people who died of World Trade Center related illnesses, so that you have not only the losses of that day, but the continued losses of what were healthy, well members who are now suffering from significant medical problems. So I think those programs are critical, not only in providing services, but also in acknowledging what people went through in those days and weeks after 9/11.
I know that day, Doctor, you were so caught up in the moment. At what point did you as a doctor realize, oh my God, this air is unsafe and there's going to be worse ahead for everyone who is here?
Day one. I mean, that you could, when you cannot see in front of you, it's not good. And honestly, Dr. Prezant, who is a pulmonologist, was very well aware of it. And literally that first day we discussed what will the consequences of this be. One of the firefighters came over to me that day and he said, there's asbestos in the air here. Are we going to be doing a decon? Because normally if there was a traditional fire or an exposure, they would do a decon. And I remember saying to him, decon? I don't know how we could do a decon here today. But again, that thought process was rather quick, that there was exposures and that we would be seeing consequences. I think we had a concern about cancer exposure, but anticipated it might not occur for 20 years or so. I think what we were struck by was how quickly after 9/11 we started seeing problems. we were very lucky that we were able to partner very early on with the CDC, NIOSH, and get on board with testing. So we began doing medicals on our members as early as October of 2001. And again, our program, our medical program had been doing admission, for new candidates as well as our members on a yearly basis. So we had pre-existing information or data. And then we were able to do a comparison after 9/11. So we did over 10,000 medicals. And again, our medical program or our team members were excellent. They did 3 shifts a day, 7 days a week to get medicals done on our members so that we could really see what had changed in members. And we were able to show the drop or change in their breathing tests after this event. So I think that kind of information was critical in showing the types of problems people were having with the GERD, with sinus problems, with pulmonary problems, in what was a well population. And that helped set the stage for that scientific information, set the stage so that we could continue to get federal funding, which was given to us again in a piecemeal fashion, but eventually led to the Zagrota bill and the permanency of that program. So I think it was critical to have that in place. And I think it acknowledged what our department and what so many members in the city had gone through.
You mentioned asbestos. Those cancers have not yet begun to appear. Is that correct? And at what point do they appear? And how widespread is this problem going to be moving forward?
Well, asbestos is often linked or made worse with tobacco smoking, which is why we began a tobacco cessation program soon after 9/11. Because again, we said we can't go back and change your exposure, but we can perhaps improve your future by eliminating cigarette smoking, because tobacco and asbestos increase your risk of having problems. So that program has been highly successful, and that has been, I think, responsible, hopefully, for improving people's odds. I think we are starting to see people with what could be asbestos related. It's very hard to separate out the types of exposures that led to different kinds of cancers. Certainly, if you look at the leukemias and lymphomas, they began soon after 9/11. And since then, we've seen a host of different cancers, including, we've seen pancreatic, colon, lung, etc. So there's a variety of different cancers that have arisen. And I don't know that you can say it's one particular chemical. You have to think about that mix of chemicals, that toxic mix that people were exposed to. So I don't see this problem going away. I see this problem continuing. And that's why we are very grateful that the permanency of this program is in place, because you had people who were 21 years old at 9/11, and you had people who were older at 9/11. So you're covering groups of people that potentially may not get cancer for forever, but certainly in a number of years.
Your son, Colin Jost, of course, of Saturday Night Live fame, wrote a book, and in that book he describes, he was in college at the time, he was away, but he didn't know for a time whether you were alive. At what point did you talk to him, and can you tell a little bit about his story?
I honestly do not remember when I talked to him. I think I depended on the family members to tell each other I was okay. I do remember, though, going up there to see him, and I felt that need to go and see him and just, be there with him and give him a hug and feel that there was a life outside of 9/11, because it really just enveloped you, that feeling that every day is like 9/11, and just to leave the city and go up to Boston and and get that hug and just see that the world still existed in a different way. When I had gone down to Washington, I had given testimony, and I felt the same way as we traveled on the train down. I remember thinking, it's still green and it's still warm, and because it felt like winter. It just felt like winter at 9/11, that everything was so black and dark, and it just felt as though it was a season in itself, and it was a season of mourning and sadness. And when you would leave the area, you would see life was going on, and it did not feel like that in the city, certainly in the department.
What people watching this and listening to this do not know, that almost to a person in the FDNY, Dr. Kerry Kelly is described as an angel. The FDNY describes Dr. Kelly as their angel. You are so, so beloved, and deservedly so.
Thank you.
Thank you for all of
I
your
love the
work.
department. It's a wonderful, wonderful group to be with.
They're easy to love.
They are. It's been an honor to be with them. So yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.